I learned two things the day my daughter's ex-husband came back for her money. Grief can be quiet, but justice never is. In the next minutes, you'll meet everyone who tore my life apart, and the few who helped me put it back together. There was my daughter, Marissa, gone too soon. Her ex-husband, Ethan, back after 10 years, chasing the fortune she built from nothing. A young woman named Denise, who risked everything to help me uncover his lies. And then, a stranger named Orion Sage, the man whose voice you'll hear when the storm finally ends. You'll see the betrayals, the lawsuits, the break-ins, the courtroom that held its breath, and the one moment when truth walked in wearing handcuffs. But stay until the end, because this isn't just about revenge. It's about what came after, the choice that changed everything. If you're watching on your phone or computer, tap like or comment like why, so I know you're here till the last second. My name is Evelyn Morrow, 67 years old, a dark-skinned mother who buried her child and built something the world couldn't destroy. This is my story. When I look back now, it feels like another lifetime. Before the lawyers, before the papers, before grief moved into my house and never left. Back then, I was just a black woman in her 30s, raising my only daughter in a little town outside Atlanta. The kind of place where everyone knew your business, but they still let you cry in peace. I worked 2 jobs, waitress by day, janitor by night. The soles of my shoes were always worn thin, my hands rough from bleach, but I never cared. Every tip I stuffed into that coffee can under the sink was one step closer to Marissa's dream. College, a degree, a life that didn't smell like kitchen grease and floor wax. Marissa was sunlight in human form, big curls, bigger laugh. She'd sit at the kitchen table sketching little houses on napkins, saying, "Mama, one day I'll build homes where families can stay together. No one left behind." She believed in togetherness. Maybe that's why she fell for Ethan. He came into her life like a warm summer storm. Charming, loud, and gone just as quick when things got real. He was the kind of man who talked smooth, but never said anything real. Nice suits, nice watch, no roots. At first, I wanted to believe him. When I saw Marissa smile again after years of struggle, I thought maybe God had finally given her a break. They got married in our backyard. Cheap wine, paper lanterns, laughter that felt too big for the space we had. For a while, they seemed happy. He called me Mama Eve. He'd bring me flowers on Sundays, always saying, "Your daughter saved me, ma'am." But one evening, I stopped by unannounced. A mother's instinct, I guess. I remember the sky that night. Thunder far away, but the air already heavy. Through the living room window, I saw him slam the table, his face twisted with something mean. Marissa stood still, like a child caught in the wrong place. He stormed out. She saw me through the glass, but she didn't wave, just looked at me, eyes full of things she couldn't say. When he left town on a business trip, she came home. Her hands trembled when she held her coffee mug. She told me everything, how he'd taken her designs, those same sketches she used to draw at my table, and presented them to investors under his name, how he drained their joint account to pay his gambling debts, how he told her she was lucky he made her someone. She said it like she was confessing a crime instead of surviving one. That night, she slept in her old room, lilac sheets, the smell of cedar still in the air. I tucked her in like I used to when she was a little girl. She was 28, but to me, she was still my baby. I wanted to promise her things would get better, but I'd made too many promises in my life that turned into prayers. At dawn, I woke up to find her gone. No note, just her mug in the sink. Still half full, still warm. The call came 2 hours later. A car off the bridge. Rain. Poor visibility. They said her seatbelt jammed. Said she didn't suffer. But mothers know when something's off. And nothing about that day made sense. I screamed until my voice broke. I remember falling to the floor, the phone still in my hand, the sound of my own heartbeat drowning everything else. The funeral was quiet. Too quiet. People whispered words like tragedy, fate, God's plan. But none of it sounded right. After everyone left, I sat alone beside her grave until the sun went down. I told her I was sorry. Sorry for not seeing it sooner, for believing him, for letting her go back that night. That's the thing about guilt. It doesn't just live in your chest. It builds a house there. A few weeks later, I went through her things. In the closet, beneath her old sketches, I found a small wooden box. Inside were blueprints, dozens of them, with her initials hidden in every corner. At the bottom, a letter in her handwriting. Mama, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll live free. Don't let anger turn you into what I tried to escape. I read that line until the ink blurred. But anger's a stubborn guest. Once it finds your address, it doesn't leave easy. Years went by. I worked less, aged more. The house became quiet, but never peaceful. Sometimes I'd talk to her photo like she was just in another room. I'd say, "You still drawing up there, baby?" I'd laugh, then cry, then fall asleep in that same chair by the window. 10 years later, a letter came in the mail. Thick paper, gold seal, too official for bad news. It said Marissa's company had been revived, posthumously. Her designs bought by a new firm, and I, Evelyn Morrow, was the sole legal heir. $35 million. $35 million. I stared at the number until it didn't look real. I cried like poor folks do when prayers get answered too late. Not joy, confusion. Because what good is a miracle when the person you prayed for isn't here to see it? I promised myself I'd use it to honor her. I built scholarships in her name, rebuilt the church roof, funded shelters. I thought maybe this was what she meant by live free. And for a while, I did. Until winter came. It was snowing that morning. The soft kind that makes the world look quiet. I was in the kitchen making cocoa when someone knocked on the door. 3 knocks. Firm. Familiar. When I opened it, my body went cold. There he was. Ethan Daniels. 10 years older. Same smug smile. Coat too expensive. Voice too smooth. He said, "We need to talk." Then, like a man reading a script. Technically, her company was founded while we were married. That makes me entitled to a portion of her estate. He slid papers across my table, the same table where my daughter once drew her dreams. I looked at the signature line. His name, printed bold. My hands trembled. Not from fear, from rage. I thought about her letter, her words. Don't let anger turn you into what I tried to escape. But my heart was already on fire. He took her once in life. He wasn't going to take her again in death. That night, I sat on the porch, the snow melting around my feet. The street was quiet. The world was still. And somewhere, I swear, I heard her laughter in the wind. Soft, forgiving, like she knew what I was about to do. I whispered, "You told me not to let anger win, baby. But maybe this isn't anger. Maybe this is justice. If this were your daughter, what would you do? Tell me in the comments." I read every word, because this isn't just one of those grandma stories. This is what happens when love, loss, and justice sit at the same table, and a mother has to decide who eats first. After that night, Sleep left me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face across my kitchen table. That confident smile, those papers with his name on them, the way he said, technically, like it erased everything my daughter had built. The house felt different after he came. The air was heavier. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded louder, meaner. I spent days rereading Marissa's letter, tracing every loop of her handwriting, whispering her words until they no longer felt like warnings, but challenges. Don't let anger turn you into what I tried to escape. But how could I not? He had stolen her life once. Now he wanted her legacy too. The more I thought about it, the more something inside me burned. Not wild, but steady. The kind of fire that doesn't scream, it waits. The next week, the phone started ringing. First came the lawyers, then the reporters, then the whispers. Ethan had filed a claim against the estate, said he was owed half of everything she left. Half, as if grief could be divided, like property. I sat through meeting after meeting, strangers talking about my daughter's life as if she were a line item on a spreadsheet. One lawyer said, "Mrs. Morrow, it's better to settle. This could drag for years." Years? He'd already stolen 10. So I hired my own attorney, not because I trusted him, but because I needed a weapon, not another wound. Soon, the headlines came. Widow accused of withholding fortune. Mother refuses to share daughter's estate. The story spread like wildfire. And somehow, I was the villain. They painted me as a greedy old woman who couldn't let go. He made sure of it. He gave interviews, smiling sadly for the cameras, saying things like, "I only want what's fair." Marissa would have wanted that. Fair. That word hurt more than any lie. He was everywhere. Morning shows, podcasts, charity galas, playing the part of the mourning ex-husband. Meanwhile, I was fielding calls from journalists who wanted my side of the story, though none of them seemed to care what I said. The world believed him because he had money, and money buys volume. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found a newspaper, folded neatly inside a plain envelope. On the front page, his face. The headline, her company, his vision, the love story that built a legacy. There was no mention of her name, except as a footnote. The late wife who inspired him. Inspired him. I laughed. Sharp, bitter, ugly. The kind of sound that doesn't heal. It bleeds. I tore that page to pieces, but it didn't stop the words from cutting deeper. That night, I went to her studio, the small shed behind the house where she used to work. Dust covered everything, but her spirit was still there. Blueprints pinned to the wall, coffee stains on the table, pencil marks frozen mid-idea. It smelled like her. Ink, wood, and dreams. I sat down, ran my fingers across her unfinished design. A community center. She'd wanted to name it the Marissa Home. I whispered, "They won't erase you, baby. Not while I'm breathing." The next morning, Denise called. Marissa's old assistant, the only one who hadn't turned her back on me. She sounded nervous. "Mrs. Morrow, you need to see this." She emailed me documents, bank transfers, invoices, receipts, money moving through shell companies, all connected to Ethan. He'd been siphoning funds from Marissa's charity accounts before she died. My stomach turned cold. She'd told me about the missing money, the fights, the secrecy. But now, it was in writing. Proof, Denise said. He's been using her name all these years to cover his debts. But if you go public, he'll drag you through hell. I stared at the screen, my reflection flickering over his lies. I said, "He already has." That week, I drove into the city, the same streets my daughter used to walk when she was still dreaming big. I met with Denise in a small diner near her old office. The same building now bore Ethan's name on the glass. The Daniels Group. Seeing it made my chest tighten. That was her handwriting, her logo, her vision, and he'd branded it like it was his birthright. I watched people go in and out, employees carrying coffee cups with his company's initials. They didn't know they were holding stolen dreams. When Denise arrived, she slid a folder across the table. Inside were statements showing he'd liquidated her shares, weeks before her death. He was preparing to take it all, she whispered. Even then, I clenched the folder in my hands until the paper crumpled. Outside, the rain started falling again. Not heavy, just steady. The kind that sounds like a warning. On the drive home, I couldn't stop shaking. I turned off the radio. The silence was louder. I kept thinking about the night Marissa came home, her hands shaking, her voice cracking. She'd said, "He told me I was nothing without him." Now he was proving it. He wanted to make sure the world believed she'd never been anything without him. Not her ideas, not her success, not even her name. That night, I sat at her desk and opened her old notebook, the one where she wrote ideas and thoughts. At the top of one page, in bold pencil strokes, she'd written, "Truth builds higher than lies." I stared at those words until my eyes burned. Maybe that was my answer. Maybe the truth needed to be built, brick by brick, piece by piece, until it stood taller than his empire of lies. I spent the next few days digging. Old emails, tax forms, contracts. Every night, I printed pages until my printer groaned. My dining table turned into a battlefield of papers. I didn't eat much. Didn't sleep either. The more I found, the more I realized how deep it went. His deals, his investors, his fake charities. He hadn't just stolen from her. He'd stolen from families she meant to help. By the end of the week, I had a binder full of proof. But proof means nothing when the world's not ready to listen. So I made a plan. Simple, steady, dangerous. If he wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time, I wouldn't fight like a grieving mother. I'd fight like the woman who raised her daughter to build things that last. I whispered to her photo on the mantel, "You built with love, baby. I'll rebuild with truth." And somewhere in that moment, the anger I'd carried for 10 years finally had a direction. The days after that blurred together. Morning, night. It all looked the same. The phone never stopped ringing. Lawyers arguing, reporters digging, everyone hungry for a quote from the grieving mother turned millionaire. I stopped answering. They didn't want truth. They wanted noise. But Ethan, he was loud enough for both of us. He went on every show that would have him, talking about our shared legacy, painting himself as the broken man who'd lost both wife and fortune. He even started a charity under her name, the Marissa Daniels Foundation. When I saw the press release online, I dropped my coffee. Her name, his control. Again, he stood in front of cameras, his voice soft, rehearsed. "This is how I keep her memory alive," he said. Alive? He'd buried her twice. Once in life, once in lies. I stared at that video until the screen blurred. Then I clicked it off. The next morning, I went to the office that used to be hers. The receptionist hesitated when she saw me. Recognition flickered, then fear. "Mr. Daniels isn't in," she said. "Good," I replied. I didn't come for him. I walked past her desk, ignoring her protests, and stepped into Marissa's old workspace. The walls were repainted, the furniture new, but I could still see her in every corner. The girl who once believed buildings could heal people. Now her name was gone from the door, her photos replaced by his awards. I sat in her chair. It still creaked the same way. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pretended she was still across the desk, barefoot, laughing. asking me if blue looked better than green on the model she'd made. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't pretending anymore. The pain wasn't nostalgia, it was gasoline. That night, Denise came over with a folder. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "I think he's paying people off," she said. "Judges, auditors, even a few journalists." I opened the folder. Bank transfers, fake contracts, signed under shell companies that didn't exist. He'd covered his tracks well, but not perfectly. We sat there in silence, the weight of it pressing on us. Denise finally whispered, "You can't take him down alone, Mrs. Morrow. He's too powerful." I looked her straight in the eye. "Then I'll show the world how small he really is." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded. Maybe she saw the same fire that used to live in my daughter's eyes. The next week, I went to see him, not as the broken mother he remembered, but as a woman who'd found her voice again. His office was glass and steel, cold, expensive, soulless. He looked up from his desk when I walked in. "Well," he said, smirking, "if it isn't the old woman with the checkbook." I didn't answer. I placed the folder on his desk. He flipped through it, pretending to be calm, but I saw the vein on his neck twitch. "This is nonsense," he said. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," I replied. "Enough to ruin the mask you've been wearing." He leaned back, laughed softly. The kind of laugh that stinks of fear hiding behind arrogance. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just an old widow clinging to her daughter's ghost. I built everything she dreamed of. You're just watching it from the grave she left you." Something inside me broke. Not like glass, but like ice that had waited too long to melt. I stood, my voice steady but low. "You didn't build anything. You stole it from her. And you're still stealing. But the difference between you and me, Ethan, is that I can live with truth. You can't even look at it." I walked out before he could answer. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of him. That night, he retaliated. A story aired on local news. New allegations against Evelyn Morrow. They claimed I'd fabricated the evidence, manipulated Marissa's company funds, forged signatures. They even played audio clips, edited, twisted, fake, of me admitting guilt. I sat frozen on the couch, watching my name drag across the bottom of the screen. I should have cried. I didn't, because deep down, I'd expected this. It was the last trick of a desperate man. But when the phone rang again, I didn't pick it up. I walked to the porch, let the cold air sting my skin, and whispered, "You want war, Ethan? Then war it is." The next morning, I called a journalist I'd met years ago, a woman named Harper, who'd once written about Marissa's architecture. I told her everything. The fraud, the offshore accounts, the foundation scam. At first, she hesitated. Too risky, too powerful a man. Then I sent her the files. 2 hours later, she called back. "If this checks out, it's going to make headlines." "It will," I said. "Just make sure her name is the first one people read." When the article came out, it spread faster than his lies ever did. Fraud allegations against Ethan Daniels, money laundering and misuse of charity funds. His investors froze their deals. His partners vanished. His name started to crack like thin ice under weight. He tried to fight back, called me, threatened lawsuits, screamed that I'd ruined his life. I let him talk until his voice shook. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "You ruined it yourself the day you forgot who she was." Then I hung up. But revenge doesn't heal you. It just makes the silence louder. That night, I walked through my house and realized how empty it still was. Justice might have been closer, but peace was still far away. I went to her old room, opened the window, and let the winter air in. For a long time, I stood there, eyes closed, listening to the quiet. And somewhere in that quiet, I heard her voice. Not words, just the sound of her laugh, light and free. I whispered, "We're almost there, baby. Almost." The storm broke 3 days after the article went live. By then, Ethan's empire had already started to shake. One by one, his investors pulled out. His board members resigned. The news ran stories on repeat. Every headline sharper than the last. Fraud, deception, betrayal. Those were his new titles now. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. For 10 years, he'd walked around untouchable. Rich, respected, righteous. Now he was just another man caught in his own web. And I wasn't ashamed to admit it. It felt good. The first time I saw him on TV after the scandal, he looked different. His perfect hair was uncombed, his smile gone. The man who once spoke in interviews about legacy now had a crack in his voice. He said he was devastated by false accusations, that he was a victim of manipulation. The anchors didn't even hide their smirks. They'd finally smelled blood. One reporter said, "Mr. Daniels, we've confirmed offshore accounts in your name and missing charity funds. Do you deny these?" His lips parted, but no sound came out. Just silence. That thick, heavy kind that tells the whole story. Later that night, Denise called. "He's finished," she said. "The feds just opened an investigation." I didn't speak for a long time. I was staring at Marissa's photo on the mantel. Her eyes, so bright, so alive. I whispered, "You hear that, baby? They finally see him." And for the first time in years, I felt something lift off my chest. Like the air had room again. But karma has a funny way of working. It doesn't just knock once. It keeps coming until every debt is paid. The next morning, his house was on the news. Raided. Boxes carried out. Computers confiscated. Men in suits walking past the same porch he used to pose on for photos. The reporter's voice said, "Authorities are investigating alleged embezzlement and fraud linked to Ethan Daniels, former CEO of the Daniels Group." They showed his car being towed, his gate surrounded by cameras. And in that moment, I remembered standing outside my own home years ago, spray paint on my garage, calling me greedy. Now, the paint was on his reputation, and the world was watching. "I won't lie to you," I laughed. Not the polite kind of laugh, but the kind that comes from deep inside the soul, where pain has been hiding for too long. It wasn't revenge. It was relief, like breathing after years underwater. Denise came over later that afternoon. We didn't even talk at first. We just turned on the TV and watched his fall play out like the evening weather. Every station had his story. Every face that once smiled at him now avoided him. There was a certain beauty in the symmetry of it all. The man who built his fortune on lies was now losing everything because of truth. But even then, part of me couldn't relax. I knew him too well. Men like Ethan don't disappear quietly. They scheme until the last breath. And I was right. That evening, I got an email from an anonymous sender. It was short. "Careful who you trust. Not everyone is on your side." For a second, the world went cold again. The fear tried to crawl back in. I called Denise, but she didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. Then, just before midnight, she texted back, "Don't worry, I'm with the agents. They're protecting the evidence now. He tried to destroy it, but it's over." When I hung up, I sat on the porch and let the night wrap around me. I thought about how far we'd come. From that day he knocked on my door with his fake sympathy, to now, when his empire was burning to ash. The stars were bright that night. clearer than I'd seen them in years. It felt like Marissa was one of them, watching, glowing, saying, "Keep going, Mama. Don't stop here." Because even with the justice I'd waited for, something in my heart knew. This wasn't the end. Justice might have started, but truth, real truth, had one more place to go. The next morning, my lawyer called. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tremor behind it. "Evelyn," he said, "you'll want to sit down. The feds are subpoenaing your name too. They need your testimony. You're the one who exposed it all." For a moment, I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. Me? The woman he once called crazy? Now the government wanted my word as evidence? I smiled. Tell them I'll be there, because the world had finally flipped the script. By that afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing again. But this time, it wasn't threats or lies. It was messages, people writing from all over. Strangers, women, mothers. "You made me believe in justice again. I wish my mom had fought back like you did. Thank you for proving we're not powerless." Reading those messages, I cried again. But these tears didn't hurt. They felt clean, like rain washing off the last layer of dirt. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really it? Was this the end of the storm? Something told me it wasn't. Because in every story, when one truth rises, another one is waiting underneath. And I could feel it. Something bigger was coming. Not just for him, for me. So I straightened my back, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and whispered, "Let's finish what we started, baby. Justice is only half the story." The hearing took place on a Monday morning. Gray sky, cold air. The kind of day that feels like the world's holding its breath. I walked into that courthouse carrying a single folder. Inside, it wasn't just evidence. It was 10 years of silence, humiliation, and sleepless nights pressed between paper. Ethan was already there, flanked by his lawyers. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller. Like the world had finally stopped believing his lies. He didn't look at me at first, but when our eyes finally met, I saw it. The fear, the guilt, the disbelief that I'd made it this far. He thought I'd break before the truth did. He thought wrong. The judge entered, and the room settled into that heavy silence only courtrooms know. My lawyer spoke first. His voice, calm but sharp. Every word slicing clean through the air. He presented the financial records, the forged contracts, the testimony from Denise, the recordings, the photos. Piece by piece, brick by brick, we built the truth higher than his tower of lies. I didn't look at him while it played, but I felt it. The way he shifted in his seat, the way his hands fidgeted with his pen, the way his jaw clenched when the judge frowned. When the recording of his own voice played, the room went still. "Get rid of those files, Denise. If anyone finds out what we did, we're finished." Finished. That word echoed like a prayer, answered late, but answered nonetheless. His lawyer stood, tried to spin it, called it out of context, said the tape was doctored. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Then why is your client's signature on every document?" Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. You could almost hear the sound of his empire cracking. I just sat there, quiet. No rage, no tears, just that deep kind of peace that comes when the truth finally starts breathing again. When the verdict came, I didn't expect fireworks. I just wanted silence. But when the judge said, "This court finds the defendant guilty of fraud, perjury, and misappropriation of funds," I exhaled for the first time in years. My eyes blurred, not from sadness, but from release. The guards moved forward. The sound of metal, handcuffs closing around his wrists, rang through the courtroom like a hymn. That sound, that was the sound of justice finding its rhythm. He turned to look at me, eyes wide, maybe expecting mercy. But mercy isn't something you ask for after you've buried truth alive. I met his gaze and said softly, "You don't deserve her name." He tried to speak, but the guards pulled him away. And just like that, the man who thought he could rewrite my daughter's story finally ran out of ink. Outside, the courthouse steps were a storm of cameras, reporters, and voices. Microphones in my face, questions flying. "Mrs. Morrow, how does it feel? Do you have any words for Mr. Daniels? What will you do now?" I looked straight at the crowd and said, "I'm not the story. My daughter is. Remember her name, Marissa Morrow. She built with love. He destroyed with greed. And today, the truth rebuilt her." The cameras flashed like lightning, but for me, it was dawn. By that evening, his face was on every screen. Not as a visionary, not as a hero, but as a man undone by his own hands. His company shut down within a week. His house, the mansion that once symbolized success, was seized by the state. The same journalists who once called me unstable now called me resilient. People sent letters. Some said I was brave. Others said I was lucky. But I knew better. Luck doesn't drag you through hell. Truth does. And truth always collects what it's owed. A few days later, I visited the lake where Marissa used to sketch designs as a girl. The same spot where she'd once said, "Mama, when I build something, I want it to stand longer than I do." I sat on that same bench, the air cool and still. I whispered, "You did, baby. You stood taller than all of them." For a moment, I thought I saw her reflection in the water. Faint, smiling, peaceful. And that's when I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about restoration. Justice didn't bring her back, but it brought me home. When I got back that night, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No name, just a wax seal, gold, shaped like a circle. Inside was a single card. On it, a handwritten message, "Justice is only the first door. Truth still has a key you haven't turned." O.S. I froze. It wasn't possible, but I knew that name. Orion Sage, the man who once appeared when I was ready to give up. The one who told me, "Weeds don't deserve your water." I looked up at the night sky, quiet, endless, and whispered, "So it's not over yet, is it?" Because somehow, deep down, I knew it wasn't. This story hadn't ended. It had just changed shape. That night, as I turned off the lights and stood by the window, I could feel something stirring again. Not anger, not fear, but purpose. Marissa's voice, Orion Sage's words, the echo of truth, all of it weaving into something bigger. The world thought justice was the ending, but I was beginning to see it was only the middle. And I wasn't done walking yet. If you've made it this far, tell me, do you believe stories like this end? Or do they just keep teaching us? Drop your thoughts below. I read every word. When the noise finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than any verdict. No reporters, no phone calls, no more flashing lights. Just the creak of my old house settling into itself, and the soft tick of the clock above the mantel. The same clock that had been there since Marissa was born. I thought victory would sound like music, like a door slamming shut behind all the pain. But it didn't. It sounded like nothing. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light spilling across the papers I hadn't thrown away yet. Court transcripts, news clippings, emails, each one proof of something won and something lost. I kept telling myself, "You did it. It's over." But over didn't feel like peace. It felt like absence. A few days later, I visited her grave. The grass had grown thick since the last time I came. The flowers were faded. Even the stone looked tired. I stood there for a long time, staring at her name carved in granite. It still didn't seem real. I had spent so many years fighting for her memory that I forgot how to simply miss her. I whispered, "We won, baby. He's gone. They know the truth now." But the words came out hollow, because the truth doesn't fill a chair at the table. It doesn't laugh from the kitchen. It doesn't hug you when you wake from nightmares. Justice had its moment, but grief doesn't keep time. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea gone cold, watching the moon rise behind the oak trees. The air smelled of rain, and somewhere far away, a train horn cried out. The sound always reminded me of Marissa, how she used to say it felt like the world was calling her somewhere new. I wondered what she'd say if she saw me now, a tired old woman with shaking hands and a heart still waiting for permission to rest. Maybe she'd laugh. Maybe she'd tell me to let go, but I didn't know how. I'd built my whole life around fighting. Now that the war was over, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. A week later, I found the letter again, the one from Orion Sage. I'd left it on the counter, unopened after the first read, but that night, I read it again. Justice is only the first door. Truth still has a key you haven't turned. I stared at those words, my fingers tracing the ink. A key I haven't turned. What did that mean? I looked around the house. The walls still lined with her drawings, the shelf still cluttered with awards she never got to see displayed. Was this what he meant? That maybe justice wasn't the end, but a beginning I hadn't dared to walk into yet? For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel strong. Just open. The next morning, I drove back to the lake, the same one where she used to sit and sketch, where I met Orion Sage for the first time. The water was calm, clear enough to see the reflection of the clouds. I stood there for a long while, feeling the wind brush against my face. There was no voice this time, no vision, just a quiet knowing that the storm had washed something clean, even if I couldn't name it yet. I whispered, "What now?" And though no one answered, I felt it in the stillness. Something is coming, something more. That night, before going to bed, I opened the window in her old room. The curtains swayed with the soft breeze. The air felt lighter, like the house itself was breathing again. For the first time, I didn't ask for signs or answers. I just said, "Thank you." And somewhere deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished, because healing doesn't come after the battle. It comes when you realize you don't have to fight anymore. The night after I returned from the lake, sleep didn't come. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. It kept circling that one line from the letter. Justice is only the first door. Truth still has a key you haven't turned. I couldn't stop wondering what that meant. What more could truth possibly want from me? Hadn't I already given everything? My daughter, my peace, my years. Around 2 a.m., I went to the porch and sat with a blanket over my knees. The air was cool, soft, humming with crickets. And then, like before, I heard the footsteps, slow, steady, familiar. When I looked up, he was there, Orion Sage. Same quiet presence, same calm that always made the world around him feel less loud. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood by the railing, looking out toward the dark line of trees. Then he said, "You've been watering the fire for a long time, Evelyn." I smiled faintly. It kept me alive. He nodded. "Fire always does, until it burns what you meant to protect." For a long moment, we just sat there. No questions, no answers. just the sound of wind and the faint creak of the porch swing. Finally, I asked, "Is this the part where you tell me what comes next?" He chuckled softly. "No, ma'am. You already know what comes next. You just don't believe it yet." I frowned. "And what's that supposed to mean?" He turned to face me, his eyes steady. "You think justice is about balance, wrong and right, loss and gain. But justice is smaller than truth. Truth doesn't weigh things. It grows them." I didn't understand. Grow what? Everything I built was already taken from me. He picked up a dried leaf from the floorboards and rolled it between his fingers. "You know why the same garden never looks the same each year? Because every season, the wind carries seeds. Some you planted, some you didn't. You can't choose what grows, Evelyn. You can only choose what you water." I looked at him, unsure if I was angry or just tired. "I don't have anything left to water." He smiled, not kindly, but truthfully. "You have forgiveness." I shook my head. "Forgiveness. For him." "Not for him," he said softly. "For you." His words hit me like a slow wave. He wasn't asking me to excuse Ethan. He was asking me to stop living in the shadow of what he'd done. Orion leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When a farmer burns the weeds, the soil becomes richer. But if he keeps standing there, mourning the weeds, he never plants again. You've been standing in ashes for too long." I stared out into the darkness, the night stretching wide and endless. For the first time, I realized how much I'd let grief define me, how much space I'd given pain to live rent-free inside my heart. I whispered, "But if I let go of the fight, who am I without it?" He looked at me with eyes that saw straight through the question. "You'll be who you were before the fire, the woman who planted things that lasted." The words landed deep. They didn't make me cry. They made me still. I thought about the garden behind the house. Overgrown, wild, neglected since Marissa died. Maybe it was time. Maybe that was the key I hadn't turned yet. Not justice, but creation. I asked, "So I just start over?" He smiled. "Not start over, start forward. Life doesn't go back, Evelyn. It roots deeper." He stood then, brushing dust from his coat. The moonlight caught his face. Calm, knowing, patient. "You've done enough fighting. Now it's time to grow." When I blinked, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the quiet hum of night. I sat there for a long time, the blanket slipping off my shoulders, his words echoing in my chest. "You can only choose what you water." The next morning, I walked to the back garden. The soil was dry, cracked, but the sun was warm. I knelt down, my knees old, my back aching, and started pulling weeds. It took hours, but I didn't stop. When I was done, I pressed a few seeds into the earth. Not for food, not for beauty, but for peace. Each one felt like a prayer I never said. Marissa used to say, "Mama, buildings are just gardens made of stone." Maybe that's what I was doing now, building something again, one seed at a time. By sunset, the garden looked different, not perfect, but alive. I stood there, hands dirty, heart lighter. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end. I felt like I was beginning something new, and maybe that's what Orion meant. Truth doesn't balance things, it grows them. And what I was growing now was freedom. That night, before bed, I wrote a note in my sugar jar. "I choose to water what stays." Then I placed it by Marissa's photo. If you've been through something that burned you down, a betrayal, a loss, a grief that still whispers when the world is quiet, maybe this is your season to plant again. Don't wait for closure. Don't wait for apologies. Just start where you are, with whatever little hope you have left, and put it in the ground. Because the truth isn't something you fight for. It's something you grow into. It's been 6 months since that night on the porch. The night Orion Sage came and reminded me that we can't choose what grows, only what we water. Since then, the garden behind my house has turned into something I never expected. Wild and beautiful. Tomatoes climbing past the fence, sunflowers taller than the porch, mint spreading like it owns the place. Sometimes I just stand there with my coffee, watching the sunlight hit each leaf, and I think this is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not planned, just alive. I named it Marissa's Garden, and on the gate, there's a small wooden sign that reads, "We grow what we choose to love." People in town started stopping by, at first to help, then just to talk. Women who'd lost their husbands, men who'd lost their way. They'd kneel beside me, planting seeds, telling stories about the people they missed. Some cried, some laughed, and in the middle of the dirt and the silence, something changed. Not in the garden, but in us. One afternoon, a young woman named Maya came by. She'd seen the news months ago about Ethan, the trial, the foundation. She said, "I came because I didn't believe peace was real anymore." I handed her a trowel and said, "Then help me prove it still is." She stayed the whole day, barely speaking, just digging, watering, breathing. When she left, she whispered, "I feel lighter." That's when I realized what Orion Sage meant. Healing isn't something you talk about. It's something you practice. Like planting, one small act at a time. I started a small program for the community. Free gardening classes for anyone who needed to start over. We meet every Sunday morning. We don't pray, but we do share. We talk about the weeds in our lives, anger, guilt, fear, and how to stop watering them. It's funny how strangers can become family when you start pulling weeds together. Sometimes the lessons aren't even about plants. One man said, "My wife left me last year. I've been angry ever since. But this helps." Another woman said, "I lost my son. I can't forgive life yet, but at least I can keep something alive." And me? I just listen, because I've learned that sometimes healing doesn't mean talking louder. It means letting someone else's silence have a home. Every morning, before the others arrive, I walk to the garden and touch the soil. It's still rough in places, still cracked in others, but it's growing, and so am I. I still talk to Marissa, though. When the wind moves through the sunflowers, I like to think it's her walking by, whispering, "Mama, you did it." And maybe I did. Not by fighting, but by planting something that will outlive both of us. Last week, the local news came by. Again, this time for a different story. The headline read, "The Mother Who Turned Grief into a Garden." They asked me what made me start it. I told them the truth, because I got tired of waiting for peace to find me. So I built a place where it couldn't get lost. The reporter smiled, eyes glassy. Before she left, she asked, "Do you think you've healed?" I thought for a long time before answering. Healing isn't a destination, honey. It's a direction. Every seed is a small step forward. Sometimes I still sit on the porch at night, the air warm, the garden glowing under the porch light. I think about everything that's happened. The fight, the trial, the silence, the letter, the lesson, and I realize maybe this was never about justice at all. Maybe it was always about growth. Justice ends stories. Growth begins them. And that's what these family drama stories are meant to remind us. That even after loss, something in us can still choose life. So if you've been holding on to pain, or waiting for closure that never came, maybe it's time to plant something new. It doesn't have to be big. A kind word, a small forgiveness, a morning where you decide to breathe instead of blame. Because you can't build peace while staring at ashes. You have to get your hands dirty again. If you've listened this far, maybe part of your heart is asking the same question mine did. What do I do now? Here's my answer. If this story made you feel even a little lighter, hit like. If it stirred something, but you don't know what it is, hit subscribe. Maybe the next story will water it for you. And if you know someone who's still fighting their storm, share this video. You might be planting the first seed in their garden, because healing isn't a secret to keep. It's a story to pass on.